Welcome to the wonderful world of wine. We are your hosts, Mark Lindsay and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. You can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. Hello again, everybody, and thank you for joining Kim and I today in the wonderful world of wine. We're here every week on WFPR 102.9 FM. How's everything going, Kim?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
It is going very well. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Our first topic today we want to talk to our listeners about is how to tell if your wine has gone bad. And this is a pretty common question we get all the time.
Mm-hmm.
My thing, and I hear this from family all the time, my thing is, you tell me if you think it's bad because you drink that wine all the time. You should know, right? I mean, it's kind of a smart reply, but honestly, I think that's the telltale thing, Kim. If you drink that wine all the time, you know when it starts to go bad, don't you think?
I would think that if you have like a favorite wine that's like your go-to, then you should know if it is tasting different than it usually is for you. I think that what's hard for a lot of people is, say you drink something that is new to you, or you go out to a restaurant and they, offer you that first taste of out of the bottle. How do you know what that wine is supposed to taste like if it is something that you aren't familiar with?
Yeah, you're not familiar with a certain style. You're tasting it for the first time. You might think it's bad, but it's actually the style of the wine. This article was from the takeout.com. And I guess we can start by what are the three main things to how to tell they go bad. They mentioned look, smell, and taste, which is obviously the progression when you're examining a wine. So what about the look, Kim? If you think the wine is bad, what can you tell by looking at it?
Well, I actually think that we should back up a little bit and explain by bad.
Okay.
So it's not just a wine that maybe you don't like the taste of, because there are some wines that are perfectly sound and taste exactly like how the winemaker wanted them to taste. You might not like them, but that does not make them a bad wine. We're talking about wines that have some sort of identifiable fault that, often we don't like to talk about good and bad wines when it comes to the flavor or the quality, because there's such a broad spectrum of wines out there that have very different flavor profiles. Some are better made than others. Some, are much more simple. Some are more complex. But when we're talking about a bad wine, we mean a wine that is not doing or not being what it's supposed to be. So if there is a fault in it, like maybe it's been open too long, or maybe it's been exposed to too much temperature fluctuation, maybe it has, frankly, a like bacterial kind of funkiness going on in it. So that's what we mean by bad. We don't mean, a wine that you don't necessarily like. We mean a wine that isn't showing what it's supposed to show.
So not typical of what that wine should be showing.
Exactly.
Tastes like. See, I like how we take a different take, because my whole take on it was it's a wine you drink all the time. How do I know it's bad? And you bring in that insight to it. So I appreciate that's a good view for
That's why there are two of us.
So now let's talk about how to tell by looking at it.
So just like when we do wine tastings, we like to see, okay, what is the color? What is the aroma? What is flavor? We kind of go through all those steps. And so going through those steps is also really a good way to see if your wine is sound or not. So often when you look at the color of a wine, you can kind of tell right off the bat if maybe the bottle has been open too long, or maybe it is on the older side. So if you were to have it now, it might not taste like it's supposed to taste because frankly, it's just too old. And a lot of this comes down to oxygen. So wines, like I like to say, wines are always going downhill to brown. So whether you have a white wine or a red wine, eventually, if you leave that wine in contact with air long enough, it'll turn brownish. So red wines get this like brick, tawny kind of color, and white wines get really brown, like almost like a, what's a
brick
like,
brown.
Brick, yeah, they both kind of go to brick, or a golden color, I would say, for white wines. So if your wines don't look to be either a more red color for your red wines and a clear pale gold, yellowish, greenish for your whites, then you might have a problem on your hands.
I like the comparison, Kim, when you like bite into the apple and it oxidizes, that type of color
Very good.
that it turns. So I don't know if we're confusing the listeners, though. When we're talking about the wine has gone bad, are we focusing on that this wine has already been opened, you've already had it, or is this something you just picked off the rack and you haven't opened it yet? So should we focus on one way or the other? I was thinking more this article was focusing on it's already something you had opened. How can we now tell?
Yeah, and it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell the color of it, frankly, if you haven't opened the bottle yet.
Correct.
Because so many bottles are brown glass or green glass. Really, the only ones that are clear glass are rosés these days. So yeah, so you kind of have to open it to find out if the color is going to show you that there's something problematic with it.
And it doesn't mean if it has a little bit of that oxidation that it is bad for you.
No.
It's just,
no.
It changes the whole taste profile of the wine. It's still not going to hurt you. It doesn't mean it's technically bad. It's just evolved in a different way. So.
And some people prefer their wines to have that little bit of extra age on them, especially drinkers of wines such as like Bordeaux or Chianti Classico that traditionally they've been left to age for a good long time because they were so difficult and frankly unpleasant to drink when they were really young. So some of these styles of wine have developed so that the people who talk about the best qualities of these wines or the best versions of these wines tend to talk about the older ones. So for something like a Bordeaux, some people like them young, some people like them old. And that really is just a personal preference. So there's nothing to say that it reaches a certain point and it's good on one side of that point and bad on the other side of that point. Just like everything else with wine appreciation, there is a spectrum. So if you see a little bit of that brown on your red wine, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is too old to drink or that it's not going to be delicious to drink. It just might be farther along in its aging than you might like or that somebody else might like, or it might be perfect for you. So I wouldn't take color just as the only indicator that something is wrong with the wine.
So we're looking at the color. It's looking a little dark, change color from what we remember it. Now we go to the smell test. We want to take a whiff of this wine and check the aroma to see if there's anything different that we might remember for this varietal or this wine. And one of the things I always like to compare is aroma and bouquet. We've talked about this a few times. Usually a younger wine, you just get a general aroma of one or two fruits or some sort of profile. And as it ages, or things evolve, you get more of a bouquet. So you're going to get more aromas coming into play. So this might be the case if you've had a bottle that was opened and you go back to it a couple of days later, it might not smell the same as when you first opened it.
And that is completely normal. You know, that is what happens when you have a bottle open for a little while. And I do kind of like this idea of comparing open bottles of something that you are familiar with, because it really can teach you a lot about the transition that wine goes through as it spends more and more time in contact with oxygen. You'll be able to see that color change. You'll be able to smell that difference, and you'll be able to taste some of the fruit has kind of faded. We won't get to that yet, but it is sort of an interesting experiment. So maybe, the next time you have an unfinished bottle of something that you are quite familiar with, leave it open for a couple of days and see what you can notice about the changes in that wine.
Typically for me on a bottle I've had open for a few days, that aroma, it's hotter and hotter to get the aroma out of the glass as when you first open it. So you have to swirl it a little bit more. You have to, really work it to get some aroma out of it after a while. And if it was chilled, you might want to let it warm up a little bit to get more aroma out of it.
Yeah, over chill, and especially a red wine. And I do suggest that people, if they want to extend the life of an open bottle of wine, regardless of what it is, put it in the refrigerator. So even a bottle of red wine, if you have that open, you're not going to finish it tonight. You might want it tomorrow or the day after. You are going to preserve a lot of the flavor and the aroma of the wine if you stick it in the refrigerator. But then you do need to let your red wine come up to room temperature, or at least take the chill off of it a little bit, because you're really not going to get anything out of those reds if they're too cold. They're just going to taste like nothing.
So that
those tannins
chilling,
aren't going to feel good.
the chilling process there is really slowing down the oxidation, correct?
Yeah. It's like, it's why you put your leftovers in the fridge. The exact same thing. We're slowing down the slow crawl to the death of the thing.
So we looked at it, we smelled it, we're still not sure. The final test, Kim, to give it a little taste.
Well, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the other things that you might smell in the bottle.
All right.
Especially if it's something that, you're already familiar with, and you might have something that is very different from what you usually expect. And we've talked about corked bottles a lot. If you get like a musty sort of wet dog kind of basementy smell, that's not cool. So that is not a good bottle. But then also sometimes your wine, if you've got really problematic bottle, it might start changing to vinegar. And the transition step between wine and vinegar actually kind of smells a little bit like nail polish remover. So if you ever open a bottle of wine and it smells a little bit like nail polish remover or like really, really pungent vinegar, then that is also considered a fault and a bad bottle. So please don't drink it. Again, it's not going to hurt you. Okay, now we can go to taste.
Okay. Now we taste it. Should detect a nice fresh tasting wine. I mean, depending on how long maybe you've already opened it, are you still getting those, nice fresh primary fruits to the wine? Or are you detecting any of those things that you smelled that you felt were off? What's your go-to tip on tasting it to see if it's bad? Yeah.
I think that it's a little more difficult to explain what you should be looking for off flavors than it is for off aromas. I feel like off aromas really kind of hit you, but off flavors you don't necessarily know. And I think that the problem with it as well is that the same words that we use to describe problematic flavors in a wine are positive words that we use for other styles of wine. So we often talk about wines that have gone off or gone bad as having quote unquote sherried flavors, but those are the flavors that you want in sherry, but they're not necessarily the flavors that you want in a Pinot Grigio. So I think that some of these descriptions are actually quite pleasant sounding. Like we always say you would look for roasted nuts or caramel or like an unusual sweetness, something like that in your wines that have gone off. But then on the other hand, you're like, oh, that sounds kind of nice. Like you'd kind of want a dessert wine that has, caramelized, sherried, nutty flavors to it, but not in your table wine. So if it's a flavor in your wine that is reminding you of a big, powerful, fortified port sherry kind of thing, it's not something that you would expect in your glass of Oregon Pinot Noir or your California Zinfandel. So that freshness of fruit is generally what you're looking for. And if the fruity flavors are veering more towards like prunes and raisins and toasted walnuts and things like that, then you might have some issue with the flavor in your bottle.
It still doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it evolved.
It could just be, it could just be quite on the older side, but not necessarily bad.
And I think you were focusing earlier saying, these are definite signs of something that is bad, that musty or volatile acid or something like that.
Yeah.
But this is just something evolving differently. And I think the tip you gave early on, if it's a wine you drink all the time, sometimes it's fun to open them up and let them sit for a little bit and see what happens with them. I know people who put things on their counter. They don't refrigerate it just to see how it evolves days later in the change and see what happens to the flavor. So
yeah. And you really can learn a lot. And, even if you have, say, 2 bottles of the same wine and you open one and you leave it open for a couple of days and then you open the other bottle and you compare the fresh one to the one that's been open, it really will teach you a lot. And we can talk about these things all day long, but the experience of it is really what is going to teach you, the wine drinker, to recognize and understand these things. It will make you a better consumer. You'll feel so much smarter at a restaurant when you go and order a bottle of wine, because you'll be able to really understand the differences between, okay, this is what, a newly opened bottle should smell and taste like. Maybe this one's been open for a little too long. And especially if you're the kind of person who goes out to restaurants and really only orders wines by the glass, you'll be able to tell if that bottle behind the bar has been open for too long. And that is a completely legitimate reason for you to send a glass of wine back. If you go to a restaurant and you order a glass of Pinot Grigio and it comes to the table and it has that like goldish, brownish color to it, and it smells like these things that we've been talking about, that bottle has been open for way too long. They should open a fresh bottle for you. So you definitely should speak up if that were to happen to you.
And typically, if we open a bottle today, Kim, what's the time frame? It's still pretty fresh, two to 5 days, even in the fridge.
It depends on the wine. I have even had luck with keeping bottles open for a week in the fridge. It really, I cannot overstate how important that whole refrigerate your open bottle thing is. And I kind of wish I had discovered it earlier, because I never really thought to do that, really early in my career. And it really would have been smart to do. But now I do it all the time. I always will put my wines back in the fridge. So definitely a couple of days or more.
Any style you find doesn't last as long? Like for me, I think sparkling.
Oh, sparkling. Absolutely.
Definitely doesn't last as long.
I found that after a couple of days, whites that are lower in acid start to kind of fall apart. Something like Sauvignon Blanc that's really high in acid does seem to have pretty good longevity with keeping it open in the fridge. And, it's surprising. I've had really good luck, even with, inexpensive reds from like Spain and Portugal. Sometimes I'll have those in there for a week and I'll think, oh, this is going to be really crummy after all this time. I'll just make sangria with it. Still tastes good. So I've been pleasantly surprised, I would say, more often than not by the just keep it in the fridge thing. You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine. We are your hosts, Kim and Mark. You can find more information about Mark on his website, franklinliquors.com, and more information about myself at vinitaswineworks.com. And as always, you can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. Our second article today is about a wine-based product that I have just recently discovered and have kind of sort of fallen in love with. How much Lillet do you sell or keep on your shelf, Mark? Any?
I'm going to tell you, Kim, over the years, less and less.
Yeah.
And I taste it, but it does not sell like it used to. And that was one of my questions to you, if this is something you see coming back. Lillet, they say. Is that how you're supposed to pronounce this?
I pronounce it Lillet, but maybe it's Lillet. Did I get the pronunciation?
No, I'm thinking it was always Lee, L-E-E-L-A-Y.
Oh, no,
but
well, this article, which is in Wine Enthusiast, is saying that it's Lillet. So we'll go with Lillet.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought. You know me and my bad pronunciation. But so let's just say what the art says. Lillet, we'll say Lillet. But so I hear people say Lily, right?
I don't know how long this product has been around for. It seems kind of old fashioned, I think.
Yeah.
Like it's one of those things that you would see on the back bar in an old movie or some period piece from the 1940s.
Isn't the whole, this is a category of wines. It's aromatized, right? Wine. Mm-hmm. It's a category that's really not obviously a popular style wine, but it goes way back to when the Greeks, everybody way back used to put things in their wines, spices or whatever, herbs to make it drinkable. And that's what I always go back to. So, but this is a French wine with Bordeaux grapes,
right?
In three styles: a red, a white, and a rosé. And it's pretty high alcohol, so it's fortified, correct? Kim? It's a fortified.
I think it's got 17%? It's got a little bit of fortification in it, but it's only 17%. So the addition to it is fortified liqueurs, but they're flavored liqueurs. So that is what makes it different from just like a bottle of white Bordeaux. So it's really only about 5 percentage points of alcohol higher than if you were to get a bottle of white Bordeaux or red Bordeaux. But because of that little bit of flavored liqueur that they add to it, it changes the flavor, but it's still is quite reminiscent of the base wine. So I have a bottle of white Lillet in my refrigerator because after reading this article, I really was intrigued. And I was like, this sounds like something I would like. So I found white, which is based on Sauvignon Blanc. And it is very sort of citrusy, but it really smells like white Bordeaux. It smells like Sauvignon Blanc. And what I think is something that could make these wines or these products more popular again is that they're really great like cocktail bases. They're almost like we have all these things out there right now where it's like pre-mixed cocktail kind of things. These make really fantastic bases for a cocktail.
Yeah, spritzes.
Spritzes, a little bit of this and a little bit of Prosecco and bam. Like there's your summer cocktail. So I've been experimenting with some things with my Lillet. So
let's talk about fun. The white version. It's Sauv Blanc Semillon, which is very popular Bordeaux white grapes. What did you said you mentioned you got kind of that Sauvignon Blanc flavor from it. Did you get any? For me, I got like more acidity and some vegetal quality from it, but more spice on the finish. I'm curious what you thought of the white. Did you drink it on its own?
I tried it straight first. Yeah. Okay. Just to see kind of what it was all about. I got more of almost like a lemon lime orangey thing. I didn't really get the spice.
No spice?
No, but I did feel the heat of the alcohol.
Yeah. And you made what with it? Did you make a martini or?
No. So
gin?
I made sort of a riff on a spritz with it. So I did the Lillet, I did grapefruit juice, I did Aperol, and I did Prosecco.
Wow.
And it was excellent.
Now, how much percentage did you put of the Lillet? Did you put in like half ounce?
I did
Not
2
much, right?
ounces of Lillet. So it was like half of the drink.
Wow.
That's only 17%.
Yeah. Well, most of the drinks I've seen using this, it's equal parts. So
that's what it kind of ended up being. It was like equal parts of Prosecco in Lillet with a splash of juice and a splash of Aperol.
So they also make a rosé, which is Merlot Cab and a little bit of Semillon.
I really want to try that. I want to find rosé.
I recently tried that.
Oh, how is it?
And it's surprisingly light red fruit, raspberries. Again, I got a hint of spice, more like almost a cinnamon spice.
I would expect that from the red. I will often get like a cinnamon spice from Merlot. So if it's a Merlot dominant blend, I would kind of expect that spiciness.
Yeah, but the finish was like I always use this term, but grapey. I got a lot of grapiness on the finish.
Okay.
So it was fruity. I mean, it was good. And what about the red? Did you try the red yet?
No.
The Rouge?
Mm-mm.
Rouge is Cab Merlot based, of course, again, Bordeaux. And this, again, I got like real fresh red fruits at first, but the finish was more brighter red fruit with no real spice or vegetal or anything in the red. So I thought the red to me was more wine than the other two.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Now, as far as sweetness goes for the rosé and the red, did they taste sweet to you?
No, surprisingly, no. Maybe it's because of the alcohol.
Maybe.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I didn't get too much sweetness in the white either. Like that fruitiness was there, but I wouldn't have described it as like a sweet liqueur.
It's unique. And I remember years ago selling like you'd get one white, one red in like a gift set type of thing. But no one really looks for it. I mean, and this is the same category as vermouth. It's a aromatized wine style. But vermouth is way more popular. But surprisingly, we don't use vermouth for spritzers like we do this.
And vermouth has that bitter element that these don't have. And I think that if you are someone who likes to experiment with different drinks, with cocktails, but is also a really big fan of wine, I think that these would be really fun to have a bottle of, 1 or 2 of them, because they really can be quite versatile, especially if you're kind of creative like I am, mixing some drinks up. I feel like these would be very forgiving. I don't think that you're necessarily going to make something that's really, really bad. Like, I think that there are a lot of really good ideas that you could do with fruit and, maybe with some gin or some vodka, sparkling water, sparkling wine, throw a little soda in there. I feel like that there is a lot of opportunity and it might be a really cool, fun. I like the gift idea. So it's like, ooh, I could do a bottle of this and
I did see a gin drink with equal parts gin and Lillet, and then a Negroni, which you've talked about in the past, and then a martini. So basic cocktails that substitute and use
Yeah.
the Lillet. So
I bet using the
it
red
does seem
in
very
a
versatile.
Negroni would be really nice.
That was one of the suggestions in the article. And the article was from Wine Enthusiast magazine. So they keep up on a lot of the kind of trends. So I would assume they wouldn't be writing about it if it's not coming back in some way. And they also said you could use this product for some sort of homemade infusions. What was your take on that? Like, what would you use that infusion for? To just put in the cocktail? But same thing,
so.
right? It's already its
that
own
one.
infusion,
That one
correct?
went a little in a different direction because they were talking about infusing not just herbs but also teas and then nuts. Like I don't know that.
Lillet?
Yeah.
Is that, yeah.
Which I think is different. That's another kind of step.
Yeah.
I feel like that's like making frangelico or something,
Well, it seems like it's trending again and something to
I hope
explore.
it is. I really think that it's fun and it's delicious, and it would be, I think, really interesting to see some of these cool cocktails, kind of riffs on traditional cocktails made with this. It may be, in some restaurant bars, see what cool and talented bartenders could do with something like this. And that would be really cool to have more wine-based things as, I think, part of bartenders' repertoires.
When you were in the restaurant, did you have Lillet behind the bar? Do you recall?
Don't recall. I don't remember any of our sort of regular cocktail recipes that included it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it in too many places I've been for cocktails. So
yeah, and it is like you were saying, it hasn't been as popular lately, so it's a little bit harder to get your hands on. But if you do see a bottle of it in the store, I would say pick one up. Thank you for listening today to The Wonderful World of Wine. We've been your hosts, Kim Simone and Mark Lindsay. You can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine, and that's a great place for you to leave us comments and questions. We always love to answer people's questions on the air. So check us out. You can see our articles on our Facebook page, and we hope to visit with you again next week. Cheers.
Wine, wine, wine.